Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I am doing well. And today we're going to talk about something we frequently mention in many of our programs because it involves so much of what we do in foreign policy, and that is the use of sanctions. And we'll deal with this more specifically because of an article that was out in American Conservative by Larison, How Sanctions Kill Iranians. And this has been always our argument. The sanctions are war. You know, people die. But that's not the way people look at it. We've always made the point that some of our allies that are anti-war say, yeah, don't drop bombs, but you can put sanctions on them and give them money, and that's short of war. But the main point here that we want to make, and we've made it before, and that is sanctions are very, very deadly. If you use the word blockade, that sounds a little more, but it borders on blockading. And recently we've seen where blockading was done with ships and stealing ships and all kinds of problems that go on. So, but the article explained, what it does to medical care, and it's deadly. And the only thing that came across my mind when I was reading it is I see the early signs of the same problems that the Iranians suffer because they're not allowed to buy stuff as a consequence of too much government in our medical care, especially Obamacare. And there's shortages in medicine and prices have gone up in this country. But we're talking about a much more serious situation in Iran because I didn't realize it, but they manufacture a lot of medications in Iran, but they need the raw products. They have to have import. So the imports are blocked and people are dying. You know, the price goes up. There becomes scarcities, and they can't deal with it. So what happens? People die, but nobody knows how many and where it happens, but the evidence is that a lot of people aren't getting their medications, and it's a result of what we're doing. So morally speaking, nobody should be off the hook for this. And there's sometimes people say, well, we just want them to mind their business and change their tune. But I think Pompeo said, we want them to hurt. They have to have pain. That is just pretty darn ugly and immoral. But they say, we're negotiating and we're humanitarians and we're trying real hard to make sure these sick people get their medications, and then they have a program that doesn't work. So there's a lot of hypocrisy in this, and the only way I see an out to this is quit being hypocritical, quit being interventionist, and help people when they're in trouble. Open up the doors to trade. But it is a mess. They've taken a serious situation, and this is just more fuel to the fire because there are a lot of problems that happen when we have these trade wars. But specifically, this was written by a medical person, and he says it's really, really painful to the people in Iran.
Yeah, and the piece is by Dan Larison in the American Conservative today, and he quotes extensively from a professor of pharmacology in Iran who has a piece, I think, in Foreign Policy, talking about the reality on the ground from someone who sees it all the time. And Larison makes a point that, the U.S. envoy responsible for providing maximum pain to Iran, Brian Hook, he says, it's a myth that our sanctions are affecting the medicine, just a myth. But this professor and Dan, they point out that that's a lie, and it's a pretty disgusting lie. And there are three ways, and you've gone over essentially, but three ways that the sanctions are killing Iranian civilians, innocent civilians, by depriving them of the medicine that they need. First of all, it's nearly impossible to process payment for medicines as such. Right. So the Iranians, as you point out, they manufacture the majority of the pharmaceuticals themselves. But as you say, they need the raw materials. So the banking restrictions make it very, very difficult for them to import the raw materials. And that, of course, creates scarcity. And that's the third part. They deprive the manufacturers of the ability to manufacture those. So that creates more scarcity, which causes the prices to skyrocket, particularly in things like cancer medicines, which you can imagine if you're seeing a loved one with cancer that's treatable, that can be cured, and they sit there and they can't afford the medicine. They watched a relative die. So these are the three specific ways that our sanctions are purposely killing innocent Iranian civilians.
And putting the sanctions on one country on another, that's bad enough. But when you do it as an empire and you can put pressure on all your pretend allies, then all of a sudden it gets much worse. And that's what we do. We put pressure. I think that story was well told about the oil because the Europeans would like to get oil from Iran. And yet we put sanctions on them. We put sanctions on the financial institution that they can't use it. But as an empire, we can put the pressure on them and they make them more deadly and more people die and we have more control over so often what the reports are happening. So we're not ever going to read or hear on the evening news of any child in a hospital that, he was on this medication. In the case you point out, some of these people who have cancer, they had been treated and all of a sudden they lose their medication and they have to, and they suffer the consequences. So you don't see these real pictures, but it reminds me of the fake pictures of the children suffering when they were blaming Saddam Hussein for doing it, and yet what we do, we bomb and put on these sanctions and literally cause people to die from it. And I don't think the American people are like that. I don't think, if we had this up and tell them, this is the consequence of what you do here and this is what will happen, and there will be collateral damage and there will people that die, and offer them something else, talking to these people and working. I can't believe 10% of the American people would buy into, oh no, what we need to do is just drop more bombs on them, boycott, steal their ships and blockade their country. Because what would the reason be? It isn't because they're about to attack us. Matter of fact, I think Pompeo actually admits, that pretended about stopping them from a nuclear weapon. I don't think they deal with that anymore. It's just to have this regime change.
Yeah, they've lost their purpose. I mean, it's hard to not conclude that the neocons are just simply demonic, because you have Pompeo saying, yeah, we want the people to suffer. You have Bolton this past week. He wants to peel the UK away from this European desire to continue with the JCPOA. So he dangles out a free trade agreement with the UK because they're in the middle of Brexit. They're looking for trade partners. He says, hey, we'll give you a free trade deal if you bump up the pressure on Iran, get away from those Europeans and join us on sanctions, and let's get tougher on China together. If you do that, then we'll give you a deal. That's almost kind of like sanctions in itself, because if you don't do it, essentially you're going to be punished with a bad trade deal. But it's just an example of how, I guess demonic is the only word I can think of to describe it.
I don't know why they can't accept the principle. Why do we have to divide? Why can't we say we'll treat everybody, the same? And that can be done. Say, oh, there are some very bad people. Well, did we ever talk to the Soviets? How could the conditions be any worse than when the Soviet Empire existed? We talked to them and got through the Cold War and didn't have a nuclear holocaust. But this is something that people don't realize, that there are ways of working out. My idea of at least moving in a direction, and the founders talked about this, and that is there were 13 colonies, and they saw themselves as very, very independent, and they thought of themselves as a country, but they decided, well, we need a uniform currency, and they dealt with that in the Constitution, but they also dealt with trade, and that's why they had the free trade that they advocated. And people say, well, why are we doing all this manipulation? Well, there's some bad people there and this sort of thing. But what would happen if they put those type of sanctions on 50 states? It would be totally insane. We'll have to watch a balance of trade. What you need is free markets, and what you need is a sound currency. And then you need to treat all these countries the same, and you can't put them on list. Well, Maduro, he's a lot worse than so-and-so, and therefore we'll have to treat him roughly. Because it's that obsession with empire. It's the obsession with power that drives the politicians to do that. And we see this so clearly when the admitted neocon gets pretty blunt about it. But the message really doesn't sink into the American people. I'm sure a lot of people have been taught, oh, don't use that word neocon. That's pejorative. You can't do that. But I think all this fighting that's going on now now with sanctions and trade wars and currency wars and the political stuff too. Absolutely unnecessary, and you could especially defend our country. But unfortunately, we suffer from all this stuff too. We're the ones that get penalized with all. You take the sanctions. If you put on sanctions, guess what? Prices go up, and they're admitting already right now that prices are creeping up more than they have in a long time. There's been always some prices going up, but now it's even consumer products are going up. It's not a free ride by saying we're going to punish you and the American people won't have any. Farmers aren't all that happy these days, you know. So the trade war, it's a good term because it is a war and it's damaging, and these sanctions are part of that, and innocent people die, and that's a tragedy.
And the thing is, to a degree, we're appealing to decency and pathos here. We're talking about innocent people, cancer victims, people that haven't done anything to prop up their government, as if any of us is responsible for the sins of our government. But even if you take a hardline realist, realpolitik approach and say, you know what, I don't care about the Iranian people, I don't care about innocent people over there, I just want us to win. Even if that's the approach you take, fine. But we have this problem in that case that, A, they don't work. They have never worked. Look at Cuba is the case study for that. It's made their lives miserable, but it doesn't work. And it also makes enemies. So if you're concerned about America being safer, and you're going around the world, and Phil Giraldi has a good piece in Strategic Culture today about how basically we're just sanctioning the entire world. So if we sanction the entire world and make everyone our enemy, it doesn't bode well for our future.
Yeah, we point out the shortcomings and a lot of reference to unintended consequences. But, we will get people that will write into our site and say, hey, you're fooling yourself if you think it's just unintended, and you have to not dismiss this easily, that maybe there is a goal in some of these people's mind. They do like to benefit. If your goal is empire, if your goal is to control oil, you want a little bit of this chaos. But if you're looking for a more peaceful society where people can go about their business, it's just accepting these principles of you don't even have to be, an affirmative action person for these other countries. If you just left them alone, it isn't like you have to do something on a positive, but that's what would happen if we had more countries that had a free society, understood free markets, agreeable on a currency. It would be so much easier to solve some of the cultural problems and the differences. There will always be those. But right now, I think the position that we hold, and whom are you going to blame the most, the Democrats or the Republicans? It seems like there's not much resistance in the Congress. There's not a party argument over this. And matter of fact, the argument is right now, the Democrats, who are theoretically supposed to be a little bit better on this, they're yelling and screaming for more sanctions on Russia. Yeah. Well, we have to get the Cold War back again. They could turn into the Soviets again, so we have to do more. And these are the liberal Democrats.
Yeah. It's amazing. And the thing is the hypocrisy of this whole approach. In Phil's speech, which I recommend, it's actually up on the Ron Paul Institute website. But, the claim is, if you read Pompeo's tweets or Bolton's tweets, the horrible, corrupt Iranian regime is starving and causing misery to its own people. You got to overthrow and change it so you're going to have, happiness and freedom and prosperity. But at the same time, we're doing the exact thing that we accuse the Iranian government of, causing misery through sanctions. The same thing with Venezuela. Maduro's mismanagement is causing people to starve. Okay, maybe that's true. So what do? We declare a blockade and we block a ship carrying food from coming into Venezuela. So who's starving them, Maduro or us? Maybe we're both doing it. How does it make us any better?
And they say we're always working on working this out. We do practice diplomacy. But the point is, if you were practicing diplomacy, you probably wouldn't put sanctions on the person you're doing diplomacy, like Zarif.
The foreign minister,
the foreign minister. Well, that's really going to help. And what about the Revolutionary Guard? I mean, that's sort of like putting sanctions on the Secret Service or something.
The Marine Corps, yeah. It's insane.
So it's a bit bizarre.
So I'll close it out by saying that we're going to be on the road here in a few days. So next week is going to be a little bit different with Liberty Report coverage. We'll probably do some audio shows, maybe some best of. But we're heading up to Washington, D.C. We're taking it on the road. We're not going to fool with TSA this time. So there's still tickets left. We had a big push earlier today and yesterday. There are a few tickets left to go to the Ron Paul Institute conference. Iran, Russia, sanctions, all of this is going to be on the table with a great day of great speakers. It's going to be fascinating. Rick Sanchez, former top U.S. Journalist, is now for RT America, top news show there. He's going to tell about the entire media in the U.S. and how it's changing. It's so many others, so interesting. Go to ronpaulinstitute.org/conference. Learn more about it. Get your ticket. Come see us. We'll see you on Saturday, a week from Saturday.
Very good. And I just want to make the point that the reason we have this program today and talking about sanctions is a lot of people think sanctions aren't that bad and it's a in-between and it's not as violent. But it is. It's aggression. It's the goal is very blatantly aggression against another country, and it leads to trouble. And Daniel made the strong point: it never does what it's supposed to do. You can have them for 50 years, and you still don't accomplish it. And it's sort of it's one-sided in the sense that the people who put on the sanctions, initiate it. And if you get into the tariff war and the currency war, it's the person that starts it that's the most responsible. But at the same time, the country that puts some of these sanctions on, ultimately, they're the ones who suffer the most. And you say, well, we were going to make that. We got rid of Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi. Yeah. But how did we suffer? A lot, because we spent a lot of money. Our soldiers got killed. We killed innocent people. We bear the burden. So it's not good. So I think sanctions are really, really bad because it brings people in to think that, well, I'm not quite as violent as those other people who would use a drone. Well, hopefully there is a little bit less violent, but it's every bit as dangerous. It's still attacking personal liberties, and it's undermining the principle of trying to get along with people with free trade and an understanding with other nations, practice diplomacy before you use the force of sanctions and tariffs and all these other things available. So there are options, and we will be talking about those options on the 24th. We hope to see you there. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.